So we're up to the beginning of Daf Lamed Amud Aleph, the top line. The Gemara had said that there were two teachings that Rav had said that there was tiyuftas from the Brisa. There are two teachings of Rav that was rejected by the Brisa. The first one was yesterday about how many corrections can you make, how many mistakes in a column is you can't correct the entire Sefer Torah. We talked about it yesterday. Now it's the second teaching of Rav. Idach the Amar Rav HaKosev Sefer Torah Uba Ligmar. If you're writing a Sefer Torah and you're completing the Sefer Torah, so this is not, by the way, this is not important. At this point, this is not finishing Bereshis or Shmos. This is finishing the Sefer Torah. La'enei Kol Yisrael. Goymer afilu be'emtzad daf. You don't have to get to the bottom. Meaning, you don't have to time it that the last words are at the bottom of the column. You could end in the middle. You could end in the middle of the column, and the column will just end in the middle. That's what Rav said. Meisa have a kasha. The kasha is Baloi. HaKosev Sefer Torah, Baloi Ligmar, Lo Yigmar be'emtzad daf, K'derech Shem Goy Mechumashim, El Mekatzav Ha'il Chatzof Daf. This Brisa clearly says not like this. Brisa says that when you're finishing the Sefer Torah, you cannot finish in the middle. You have to finish at the end. And by the way, that means that if you're running out of words and you didn't time it right, nowadays they use tikkuns. They make sure that everything's. If you're not timing right, you got to stretch out the words, start writing them longer, and all these things, which in not great Sefer Torah you sometimes see. But it's ideal not like that. But the point is, Rav said you could finish La'enei Kol Yisrael in the middle of in the middle of the column. This Brisa clearly says not like that. So the Gemara says, so Rav pivots. Kikama Rav b'chumashim. Rav didn't mean finishing a Sefer Torah. He meant finishing Bereshis or Shmos, meaning not the Sefer Torah. If you finish Bereshis or Shmos, if Vayikra Bamidbar, don't have to end at the bottom of the column. You can end in the middle of the column. You could finish L'chachila in the middle of a column by Bereshis. What kasha doesn't
mean and not say.
No, it means if you Bereshis Shema, as I said the words, finishing Bereshis Shmos Vayikra Bamidbar, don't have to finish at the end. Devarim taki finish at the end. So when Rav said Sefer Torah, he meant Chumash. He meant Bereshis. Says the Gemara, Ha Sefer Torah comment. That's not what he said. He said Sefer Torah. So Chumashim shall Sefer Torah. The first section of the Sefer Torah. That's what he meant. Okay, it's a daichik. Eini, is this true? Didn't Rav say the words La'enei Kol Yisrael can be in the middle of the column? La'enei Kol Yisrael is the end of Devarim. It's the end of the Sefer Torah. So how could you say that Rav meant ending Bereshis? He says La'enei Kol Yisrael. So it says the Gemara, Be'emtza Shita Itmar. Change the girsa. When Rav said you could finish Devarim in the end of the middle of the column, take out the word column, middle of the line. It has to be at the bottom of the column. But it doesn't have to be the end of the line. You could end in the middle of the line. Okay. The Gemara says, Rabbanan, there's two different versions of what Rav holds, just the conclusion of the sugya. Rabbanan ami af be'emtza shita. Rabbanan hold you could finish in the middle of the line or the middle of the column. And according to the Rabbanan, they take Rav's statement as the way it is. You could finish in the middle of the line or the middle of the column, not like the Brisa. But Rav Ashi Omar be'emtza shita dafka. Rav Ashi says, no. Rav agrees it has to finish at the bottom of the column. It just doesn't have to be the end of the line. It could be the middle line, but the end of the column it has to be. Two different versions of what Rav holds. And Hilchasa be'emtza shita dafka, and the halacha is that it has to be the bottom of the paragraph, the bottom of the column. It just could be in the middle of the pasuk, middle of the line. Okay. Says the Gemara Vayter, Am Rabbi Shua bar Abba, Rav Gidol Rav. Shmoina psukim shebetayra yachid kaira oisan bebeis hakneses. The last 8 psukim could be read by a yachid. Now, what does this mean? So, there's two different versions of what this means. This means, according to Rashi, according to the Rambam says the last 8 psukim of the Torah you don't need a minyan for. It's a chiddush. You don't need a minyan for kriyas Torah. That's the Rambam. But we'll go with Rashi's mahalach. Rashi's mahalach is normally, by Sfardim they do this all the time. They'll take aliyahs and they'll just split up. Od Acharon, Hosafa. We don't split up the last 8 psukim of the Torah. Yachid. One aliyah for the last 8 psukim. We don't split it up. Now, what's unique about the last 8 psukim? This is from the words Vayamas Moshe. The last 8 psukim describes post the death of Moshe onward. Those last 8 psukim says, according to Rashi, it says the Gemara has to be read by one person. You can't split it up. Meaning, it's different than the rest of the Torah. So says the Gemara, Kiman, who is this like that we're treating the last 8 psukim differently? It's the like Rav Shimon. It's not like Rav Shimon. Why? Because there's, as we'll see right now, I'll say it outside, we'll see it inside, there's a machlokes, who wrote the last 8 psukim? According to Rav Shimon, I'll say this all outside. According to Rav Yehuda, and Rav Nechemia, the last 8 psukim were written by Yeshua. They were not written by Moshe Rabbeinu, because Moshe Rabbeinu can't describe his death. So they were not written by Moshe, they were written by Yeshua. By the way, according to this, it makes a lot of sense why it's treated differently. The whole Torah, you could split up the parshas to multiple aliyahs. You can't do the last 8. Why? Because they were written by someone else. If they're written by Yeshua, they're treated differently. Okay. The problem is Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon says, no, they were written by Moshe Rabbeinu. They're just written with his tears. Whatever this means. That normally Hashem said the words, Moshe Rabbeinu said the words out loud and wrote it. Over here, he wrote the words, but he didn't say it. Whatever that pshat is, it could be that, according to some of Hashem, that Moshe Rabbeinu did not understand the meaning of the psukim, meaning Hashem just said letter after by letter, and then it described. But B'kitzur, it was written by Moshe. So the shaila is, if it's written by Moshe Rabbeinu, at the end of the day, why is it different than the rest of the Torah? It might have been written with his tears, I understand that, but why is it treated differently than the rest of the Torah? Let's see it inside. The Gemara says, "Demand the loiker of Shimon, the Tanya, v'yamas shar Moshe, eved Hashem the last psukim, efshar Moshe chai because of yamas Moshe." How can Moshe write the words of v'yamas shar Moshe when it didn't happen yet? Ela ad kan kosav Moshe, mekan ve'elach kosav Yeshua ben Nun. The last 8 psukim were written by Yeshua ben Nun. Div Rav Yehuda of Rav Nechemia. That's the shita of Rav Yehuda and Rav Nechemia. Amr le Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon says, wait a minute. Didn't Moshe Rabbeinu tell Klal Yisrael to take the Torah and take it with them? A Torah means complete. So you're telling me that Moshe Rabbeinu, think about this, Moshe Rabbeinu, according to these opinions, was telling Klal Yisrael to take a Apostle Sefer Torah. Why? If you have a Sefer Torah that's missing the last 8 psukim, it's possible. Of course it's possible. That's what it was now. You're telling me Moshe Rabbeinu didn't write the last 8 psukim. So it was a Sefer Torah minus the last 8 psukim. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu was telling Klal Yisrael to take? A Sefer Torah missing the last 8 psukim? Can't be. Moshe Rabbeinu wrote every single letter. Comes of Shimon, Amr Shimon. Esher Sefer Torah chasar ois achas uksiv lokayach Sefer Torah v'zasanta Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu told him to take the Sefer Torah. How could you tell me it's missing 8 psukim? No way. Ela ad kana kadosh baruch hu oimer uMoshe oimer b'kaisev. It was different. It was written by Moshe, but slightly differently. The rest of the Torah, Hashem would say it. Moshe Rabbeinu would say it out loud, and then write it. But mikan ve'elach, the last 8 psukim, hakadosh baruch hu oimer uMoshe kaisev b'dema. Moshe Rabbeinu did not say the words out loud because he couldn't say those words, but he wrote it with his tears. Whatever this means, but it's written by Moshe Rabbeinu. Similarly, we find the concept of normally saying the words out loud, but sometimes you just can't. With Yirmiyah, the pasuk describes that certain parts of Eicha, Yirmiyah could not say the words out loud. He wrote it, but he couldn't say the words out loud. So similar to Moshe Rabbeinu v'Yom Moshe. It says, "V'Yomil Hambaruch mepiv yikari alai" is called Dvar Melav and Kaisev al Sefer B'Diyai. That he wrote the words, but he didn't say it. The Kitzur, the shaila is again. If you're telling me that it was written by Moshe Rabbeinu, albeit with his tears, why is it I can't have multiple aliyahs? Why are you treating it differently if it's written by Moshe like the rest of the Torah? So I'm the limit the of Shimon. The answer is no. I feel the time Rav Shimon. Hoyel v'shtani yishtani. The answer is even according to Rav Shimon, it might have been written by Moshe, but it was different. Meaning, was it as different as Rav Yehuda's shita that was written by Yeshua? No. But it was not the same. The rest of the Torah was written a certain way. This was not written that way, and this was written with tears. Because it was written slightly differently, you can't split up the aliyahs into multiple parsha into multiple aliyahs. You're supposed to write a Sefer Torah. Let's say you don't write a Sefer Torah, you buy a Sefer Torah. Are you makayim the mitzvah of atem kisvu lechem sashir azais? So the Gemara says, if you buy a Sefer Torah, kechaytif mitzvah nashuk. It's like grabbing a mitzvah. So there's 2 different pshatim what this means. According to Rashi, what this means is you grab the mitzvah. It's not the same as writing, but you got a mitzvah. According to other opinions, it's like stealing a mitzvah, like you tried to get away with something. You didn't mekayim the mitzvah at all. Okay, but let's go with the mahalach that you mekayim the mitzvah. By the way, it's a famous rush that why is it that nowadays people are not as makbid of writing Sefer Torah? Again, people, if they can afford it, but it's not like it used to be. It says the rush, because it used to be the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah is not just to write a Sefer Torah, it's because practically they used to learn from the Sefer Torah. Nowadays, they used to just take a chumash and they would learn and they would speak out the Gemaras while learning chumash. Nowadays, we have svarim, printed svarim. So now the key mitzvah is not by writing a Sefer Torah, it's by buying a Shas, and buying a Mishnayos, and buying a Gemara. That's what Shizas HaRush. Okay. Kosvu Maila, but if you write the Sefer Torah, Maila Bakosov Kilukim Har Sinai. It's a much higher madrega, it's mamish as if you wrote it in Makabel from Har Sinai.
Writing the ice is the same.
Not yet. Now, Amzer Sheshes, Im Hegia Afilo Isachas. If you buy a Sefer Torah and you correct one letter, Maila Bakosov, it's as if you wrote it. So I think this is where the Indian of people writing a letter, you're writing a letter is because it says, by the way, just Agav, you should just know, a lot of times, whatever, when usually by a Ksiva Sefer Torah, the letters are already, on the outline is already done, and they fill it in. According to the Shaul Meshiv, he holds that it's kosher without being filled in. So you're not mekayim anything. But it does protect you, is that if you have someone who's not the biggest Yari Shemayim who goes to these things, sometimes they're not even religious, and they fill it in, or if they're just holding the Sefer saying they're not doing anything, that just makes the end feel nice. But if they're filling it in, they're not religious. How are you doing this? The answer is it was kosher anyway. They're not doing anything. Okay, fine. Okay. Tan Rabbanon. Okay. The next Gemara.
You just told me not to hear this.
You're not writing it. Messiah. I don't know what it does. I don't know. Holding onto his hand, you think you're the cipher? You're not the cipher. I don't know what it does. Big Rabbanim usually fill it in themselves. They don't like to write it. I don't know what holding does. I don't know. I'm sure it's something. I take it back. I mean, it's a big deal. Okay. Tan Rabbanon. I'm learning like every single time I try to be sharp. My car gets stuck. Okay, so let me just say the next Gemara outside, just to understand. The Sefer Torah is written on a bunch of different sheets that are sewn together. There is a regulation for the size of the sheets. Now, what the regulation is like this. Now, let's assume we're talking about the average column size. Let's assume the average column size is 3 inches, whatever. I'm not talking about tiny columns. I'm talking the average column size. You should have a cloth. The size of the sheet has to be big enough for 3, but not large enough for 8. I'll give you what I mean is like this. Let's say the regulation of each column is 3 inches. It should be between 9 inches and 24 inches. The reason why, and this is not the amount of columns, it's the size of the columns. I'll tell you why. Let's say you say to yourself, I don't want it to be, I got like 1,000 sheets and I'll just sew them up. I'll do a column, a sheet, a column, a sheet. Then you're seeing too much stitching. It's not nice. Then you say to yourself, I'll do this. I found this massive cow and I'll do like 30 columns in one giant sheet. The problem is then you're not seeing the stitching. The stitching is part of it, but we don't want it to be the main show. So therefore, it should be between the sizes of 3 regular size columns and 8 regular size columns. But says the Gemara, let's say you say to yourself like this. It's supposed to be the regulation size between 3 average columns and 8 average columns. Let's say you buy a sheet that can hold 3 average size columns. Perfect, yeah? You say to yourself, I'm going to write 10 little baby columns in there. Avi said that there's a regulation size. It's the right size. I'll just put tiny. I'll stuff in so many columns in that. No good. Why? Because then it looks like an Igeris. It looks like a Megillah. Megillahs have very small ones. It doesn't look like a Sefer Torah. Then you say to yourself, okay, I'll buy a regulation size. Again, it'll be hold enough for 3. I'll write 1 massive column. But that's ein of Meshaitatis. It's hard. If you ever see a cipher, no, I haven't said anything. If you haven't seen a cipher, by Balkaira, by like the Megillahs, by like Oz Yasher, it's hard because your eyes have to go all the way across. If you have a giant column like this, it's hard to read as much. So says the Gemara, it should be the average column size should be wide enough for the word mishpacheseyim 3 times. Says the Gemara in Nizdamna, let's say you find a sheet that's too big. It's to hold 9 regulation columns, so it's too big. So you got to cut it in half. Here's how you cut it in half. You do 4 and 5. You don't do 3 and 6. Again, you have this giant piece of parchment. It's too big, so you got to cut it in half. Do not split it up 3 columns and 6 columns, because that's not as symmetrical. 4 and 5 is more symmetrical and nicer looking. Says the Gemara, now, Bamedvar Murim, this whole halacha, that you're not supposed to make too many columns or too many columns or even 1 giant column, that's betchilas hasefer. That's only in the beginning of the Sefer Torah. Aval b'soif hasefer, but let's say you get to the end and you didn't time it right, and now there's only got 1 pasuk left. Afil pasuk echad, afil daf echad. Just write 1 pasuk. Meaning, this whole thing that there's a regulation column size, that's only throughout the Sefer Torah. The end of it, end it however you want. You can just end it with 1 pasuk. Now the Gemara understands this to mean that I can just take 1 pasuk, write the line, and then just have blank. The problem is you can't just have blank. We already said before you can't have blank. Says the Gemara, pasuk echad sal gadayto, elaima pasuk echad b'daf echad. What this means is, it's very interesting. You know the Megillah, it says Ves vayisasa aseres b'nei Haman. It's 1 pasuk that it's written like a column. That's what you would do for 1 pasuk. If let's say you wrote, you end it, you have 1 pasuk left, and you you get to the new column, you'll take that one pasuk and just write Baruch Ata Le'enei Kol Yisrael, so that at least it fills a column. You have no choice. I mean,
this whole idea of the column size.
Yes.
Today we have.
Baruch Hashem today is not a good.
Don't like this really small ones.
Yeah.
Like Rabbi Friedman, they'll have to.
Oh, those. I don't know how they figure that out. But I learned the halachas recently with Mr. Hach. I don't know how the small Sefer Torah. There's a regulation size. I don't know how the. Yeah, maybe it's a ratio. I don't know. Says the.
They're also able to get a lot more words.
They are, but I don't know how it works, to be honest, because there are a size that you're supposed to have. I don't know. Says the Gemara, Shir Gillian, what's the size of the margins? You're supposed to leave blank papers, blank part of the margin, the klaf. What's the ratio? So, milmata tefach, on the bottom should be a tefach. By the way, when you have these small sefer Torah, they do not leave a tefach. I don't know. Bottom is a tefach. Milmaylo shalosh etzba'is. On top, it should be 3 finger lengths of left blank. Ubein daf ledaf. And between one column and the next, kimole reichav shtei etzba'is, 2 widths of 2 fingers. Ubechumashim, and in the now that's by a sefer Torah. Let's say you have a chumash. Chumashim were just klafs of bereshis. It's not a sefer Torah, but it has certain halachas. They used to write this on klaf. So what are the laws of a chumash, of writing a chumash? Again, nowadays it's printed, so it's not a geh, but back then they used to have some regulations. The halacha is like this. Milmata shalish etzba'is. At the bottom of each column, there should be a margin of 3 fingers. Milmaylo shtei etzba'is. Above, there should be 2. Bein daf l'daf kemali roiche revach gudel. And between columns, there should be the width of a thumb. Ubein shita l'shita. Now, between the lines, we don't do this, but between the lines in a sefer Torah is kamali shita. There should be blank the size of a line itself. We don't do that. Definitely don't do that. It says 1.5 spacing on Microsoft Word. Ubein teva. Times New Roman. Ubein teva l'teva kimale es katana. And between a word and the next, there should be the space of a small yud, at least a small yud. Ubein ois la'ois kimale chut asayra. And between letters, all you need is a hair breadth, because it can't be touching the next letter. Now, there is another halacha. The ksav ideally should be uniformed, meaning if you're the cipher and your aleph is a centimeter, and your base is a centimeter, your letter should be a centimeter. You should not have it where it's like a normal. You have this by Megillas, because Megillas, the halachas are not like that, where in the beginning it's written very nicely, and then the end it's like, like they run out of tar, they make it big. It should look uniformed. Al yimatas aksav. Don't make the letters smaller. Not because you need space at the bottom. Not because you need space on top. Or you need space between the lines. Or you need space between the paragraphs. Meaning, try to keep it as uniform as you can. Now here's the shayla. Let's say you're running out of space. So you know how you're supposed to, it's nice for the columns to just end like perfectly straight. But sometimes it goes out a little bit. Like one word will be a little bit longer than the rest. So what's the regulation for that? Let's say you have a word that is 5-letter word at the end of the line, and there's not enough room in the line. Do you just go to the next line, or could you just go it sticking out a little bit? So here's the halacha. You can't have 2 letters in the line and 3 letters sticking out. The line ends like this, but one word, you went too far. It's supposed to be. So that last word, you can't have 3 letters out and 2 letters in. Yeah, like the Gemara. You can't have 3 letters out and 2 letters in because the majority of the word is sticking out of the line. Go to the next page. You could have 3 letters in and 2 letters out. That's not so bad. But because the majority of the word is still in the line. But by the way, let's say if you walk away from this, you say you could have 2 letters out. Well, of a 5-letter word, you could have 2 letters out because it's the minority of the word. But let's say you have a word that's just 2 letters. No good. It's not 2 letters. It's the minority of the word. If 2 letters is a word in of itself, it can't be sticking out of the line. Just rather don't put it at the end of the line and sticking out. Rather, start the next line. Hataya b'shem. Interesting shayla. And this is going to be for a little bit. Say it again. Well, so there are some shittas, I believe, that did not have the regulation halachas of. I believe so, but I'll be honest, I don't know how this works. Practical halacha. A lot of this is l'chachila. I don't know how a lot of this works.
Can I ask you a question?
I thought about that. So here's the next Gemara. Interesting situation. You write a column, psukim. You wrote a whole thing. You start reading the psukim, and then halfway through you realize, I missed a word, and that word is Hashem. So it's not like you realized the mistake before you continued writing. It's now a whole paragraph. So what do? So if you write, okay, so let's say there's the line has 10 words. And instead of Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe Lemar, you're Vaydaber al Moshe Lemar. So I got to get the word Hashem in there. The problem is, I've already continued writing. Some word is going to have to be like, like when you're writing, you just like write it on top and just like point in an arrow down, like old school. You're going to have to do that. The question is, do you do that? Because you can't get it to fit in, you understand? Unless you erase everything, which you're not going to do. So the question is, do you write Hashem's, and there's a couple issues. Do you write Hashem's, you could just write Hashem's name like sort of hovering above the two words. Like, you wouldn't write an arrow, but you understand, Kilo is like, Ve'yedaber El Moshe, you write Hashem, like above it, hovering above it. The problem is it's not so respectful to have Hashem's name hovering above. So the other alternative is to write Hashem normally and then have the other words hovering above. Something's got to hover above. There's not enough room because I kept on writing. Another issue is, are you able to scratch out the next letters and write Hashem's name on a scratched out part? Because when you scratch out, it's not as nice. So the question is, what do you do in this situation, basically? So it says the Gemara, there's a couple of opinions. Hatoya b'shem, if you make a mistake in writing by omitting the name of Hashem, but you kept writing, so goyres mashakasav, you let the letters dry, then scratch them off. Toiles shemashagarar, write Hashem in the scratched out part, and then write the other words sort of hovering above. That's the first opinion. Because Hashem makagrar, divrei Rav Yehuda, that's Rav Yehuda's shita. Rav Yosi Omer, Aftelin is Hashem. Rav Yosi says, no, you don't have to do that. You could write Hashem's name hovering above. Like you write Hashem as if there's like an arrow, Rav Yitzchak Omer, Af Moichik, because Rav Yitzchak, I tell you, big chiddush, says Rav Yitzchak. You could write Hashem's name not only on this scratched out part, you could erase the letters when they're wet. You see, when you let the letters dry and then scratch it off, all the ink will leave. Part of the parchment will also leave, but at least all the ink will leave. Rav Yitzchak says you don't have to do that. Erase them while they're still wet. Now, even though there's a concern that they'll be smudging, you won't be able to get all the ink off, it's fine. So erase, write Hashem's name, and then write the other words hanging. This Rav Yitzchak Shita. Rav Shimon Shazuri, important by the way that it's Rav Shimon Shazuri, as we say for the rest of the daf. Rav Shimon Shazuri Oimer, Kol Hashem Kulei Toilin, Miktsase in Toilin. You could hang the entire name of Hashem, but you can't hang part of Hashem's name. Meaning, if let's say you need to write the entire Yud K Vav K in between, like above, that's fine. But if you can get like 2 letters in, you can't do Yud K and then like Vav K above. It's all or nothing. Rav Shimon ben Elazar Omer Shem Rameir, Ein Kais v'Nes Hashem, Lo Yamakim Grar, Lo Yamakim Machak, Vein Toilin Oisai. Rav Meir says we don't write Hashem's name on an erased part of the letters, meaning erasing it when it's wet is no good, erasing it when it's dry is no good, and we don't hang Hashem's name. So what do you do in this case? If you can't write Hashem's name on the line, and you can't write it above the line, because Rav Meir says, I won't allow you to write Hashem's name on an erased part, you can't write it on a scratched out part, and you can't write it above. So what do? Geniza. Take that entire column, put it in Shemus, and rewrite the entire column. That's what Rav Meir says. Says the Gemara, okay. Now Rav Shimon Shazuri said you could hang the entire name of Hashem. Says the Gemara, Itmar Rav Chananel Amarav Halacha Toilin is Hashem. Rabbi Archana Amar Rav Yitzchak Shmuel Halacha Moicha v'Kosev. These different opinions. Now, by the way, so instead of listing all the names, Rav Chana Amarav says you could just Toil Hashem, which is the Shita of Rav Yosi. Rabbi Archana says you could actually erase Hashem's name, blot it out, and then erase the other letters and then write Hashem's name, which was the Shita of Rav Yitzchak. So the question is, why not just say halacha Rav Yitzchak halacha? Why are you saying their shitas? Just say halacha Rav Yitzchak halacha Rav Yosi. V'leim amar halacha mark halacha kamar. Mishum da'apchile. The answer is because people were confusing which names were which, so they didn't want to just say halacha Rav Yosi, because then over time people were forgetting what Rav Yosi says. He said, I'm going to say what the shita is that I hold like. Okay. Very interesting end of the daf. Says the Gemara. Amar Ravin bar Chinna, Amar Ula, Amar Rav Chanina. Important that you know the names. Ravin bar Chinna says the name of Ula. In the name of Rav Chanina, halacha Rav Shimon Shazuri. The halacha of Rav Shimon Shazuri that you could be toila, all of the name of Hashem could be written above the letters, like in between the words, but not part of it. Okay.
You're not part of the name
You can't write part of Hashem's name in and part of Hashem's name out.
Oh.
Says v'loy oid. By the way, then they add elakol makar shoshana rishim shazuri elcha k'maisa. Not just is the halacha like rishim shazuri in this case, meaning they said it over here, and they said the truth is it's halacha like rishim shazuri kol terakula. Okay. So the question is, ahai, on which ruling of? I'm sorry. Let me read the words again. Ravin bar Chinna, Amar Ula, Amar Rav Yechona, halacha rishim shazuri. Which halacha? In which case? Now I assume we're talking about our discussion, because we just had it. But they never said that. They just said halacha follows Rishim Shazuri here, whatever here is, and halacha follows Rishim Shazuri in Kol HaTerakula. So the question is, what topic were they discussing when they said the halacha follows Rishim Shazuri? And this is a very strange thing. We're going to have like 5 or 6 different options, and there's going to be the same rejection each one. We're going to find 5 or 6 cases where the halacha follows Rishim Shazuri, and there's a list of Ameroim who said halacha Rishim Shazuri, and they're not on the list. And the question is, if they taka said it about A, B, or C, or D, why is their name not in the list of the people that said halacha Rishim Shazuri? Now I read this and I'm like, so put their name in. I don't know. No, when the Gemara makes a list of like Rabbi b'shem Rav bar Chana b'shem Rav Abba bar Ada blah blah blah, the Gemara is like, that's just a list. Like that is a tradition of those Rabbanim only. So if you say the same thing but you're not part of that list, maybe you didn't say it. It's a very interesting thing. So these are Amoraim said the halacha follows Rishim Shazuri in a specific case, and the truth is, it follows in Kol Terakula. What was a specific case that they said halacha follows Rishim Shazuri, and then they built Kol Terakula based on that? So says the Gemara, aha, which case did they say that? So Ilay Ma'aha. Well, let's go our case. That's why he's here. Rishim Shazuri Omer, Kol Hashem Kulei Thailand, Miktasein Thailand. The problem is, if that's what they said, that this is the case that Rishim Shazuri was referring to, and they said we paskin like Rishim Shazuri, and this is Ravin bar Chinna Amar Ula Amar Rav Chanina, the problem is like this. Ha'itmar Allah, but there's another shita that says Amar Rav Chananel Amar Rav, halacha Thailand is Hashem, v'Rav Chananel Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel, halacha Meichav v'Kaisev. Rav Chananel Amar Rav said that we paskin like Rishim Shazuri. She said, great. More the merrier. No. If Rav Chinina Amar Ula Amar Rav Chanina says we pass like Rishim Shazuri, then why is the Gemara just quoting Rav Chananel Amar Rav saying we pass like Rishim Shazuri? It should say Amar Rav Chananel Amar Rav v'Amar Rav Avin Bar Chinina Amar Ula Amar Rav Chanina halach Rishim Shazuri. Meaning you got to list the whole list. The very fact that it didn't list them means they didn't say it. But again, to me, it's a fascinating approach because I would just assume throw the name in there. But you understand? So if these Rabbanim are saying the halacha follows Rishim Shazuri, it can't be this case because if it's this case, their name would be on the list. So says the Gemara, V'im Isa Hanami Lema. So what the Gemara is going to do basically, we're going to do this very quickly. There's about 4 cases. We're going to quote Rishim Shazuri, random cases throughout Kol Terakula, which each time, we said maybe that's what they're referring to. And the problem is, each time we pass like Rishim Shazuri, but there's a list, and they're not on the list of people who said that we pass like Rishim Shazuri, so they obviously didn't say it in that case. Says the Gemara, okay, aha. Rishim Shazuri Omer. Afilu ben chamei shanim v'chayrish besada shchita ima metarasa. Okay, very quickly, it's a very interesting concept. It's called the ben pekua. Victory sip. Ben pekua is like this. You shecht a mommy cow, and you open up the stomach, and there's a fetus in there. You could technically minatara eat the fetus without shchita. Let's say you open up the fetus, and it's like a full 9-month-old, and the fetus starts walking around. Technically, minatayra, you could eat the fetus without shchita. You could shoot in the head and eat it. The Rabbanon didn't allow it because the Rabbanon said it's going to be a very bad optic because people aren't going to know that it's a ben pekua or whatever. Rishim Shazuri disagrees. He says, no, afilu ben chamei shanim. The little baby cow can have grown up and it's 5 years old and it's plowing. You can go over with a gun and eat it. Shoot it in the head and eat it. Because it already had a shchita through the mother. Maybe that's the sheet of Rishim Shazuri that they said. The problem is, ha'itmar lo amr zira amr Rav Chanina halachik Rishim Shazuri v'misa hanami lema. Now this is a little bit harder, by the way. The problem is, we already said the halacha follows Rishim Shazuri, and that was by zira in the neighbor of Chanina. And what are we talking about? We're Ula in the neighbor of Chanina. So it's the same Rav Chanina. But if Ula said it, why isn't he in the list? Why are you saying Zeiri said in the name of Chanina? It should say Amr Zeiri v'Amar Ula b'shem Rav Chanina. The very fact that it's not on the list means they didn't say it regarding that psak of Rishim Shazuri. Again, there's a specific psak that we're looking for that they said the halacha follows Rishim Shazuri, which is that case. And we're listing all cases that the halacha does follow Rishim Shazuri, but they're not on the list. So if they're not on the list, they obviously didn't say it.
The Ben Pekua case.
Yeah, but the problem is that the Ziri says in the name of Chanina Lachav Azar Shem Shazuri, and if it's true, it should say Amr Ziri, Amr of Chanina, Va'amri La Amr Ula Amr of Chanina. Why isn't that? It must be Ula didn't say it on this case. Okay, another case. Elaha. Rishana Hayu Oimrim Hayotze Bekular. Okay, very quickly outside. If you tell someone, you say Avi, write a get for my wife. So I write it and then I deliver it. No good, because you never said deliver. You said write. But what the halacha was that if someone was going to be killed in execution and he's walking and he says, write a get for my wife, the halacha is you can deliver it. Why? Because we understand he obviously wants it to be delivered. He's going to be killed and he's just freaking out and he's just not thinking to say that. So it says the Gemara, then they extended and they said, even if someone's going on a boat ride. Boats used to be very dangerous. The guy's on the boat and he's screaming across the embankment and he says, write a get for my wife. The halach is you could deliver it. Why? Because he obviously that's what he means. He's not just write it to keep it in the cupboard. No, write it and deliver it. Then it says, Rav Shimon Shazuri said, any sick person, any ill person that says write a get for my wife, you could deliver it. So maybe that's the Rav Shimon Shazuri that we paskin like. So it says the Gemara, Inami, or another one. But that's what he meant. Why would a sick person who's dying from cancer write a get for my wife and without the intention of delivering it? So that could be that teaching of Shimon Shazuri, or another teaching. Trumas meiser shel demai shechazul l'mekoymai. Shimon Shazuri omer af b'chol shoylei v'halcha elpiv. Okay, this is very simple. And that is there's a concept called demai. Demai means that we're not sure whether amaratzim separated trumas and meisers. So mitzad chumra we have to separate it. So let's say I separate trumas meiser, which is 1/10 of a tenth, which is 100th. So think about it like this. I have 100 apples, yeah? I have 100 apples. I separate Trumas Meiser, and then the kid takes the apple and throws it back in accidentally. So what happens when that gets mixed in? The entire thing's aser, right? The problem is, this whole thing's a chumrah, and because of this, I can't eat the whole thing. So you know what Shimon Shazuri says? Ask the person that you bought it from. Demai means you go to a store of Amaratzim. We don't trust that they separate Trumas and Meisers, and therefore we have to do it Mechumra. Shimon Shazuri says, go to the store and ask the guy, did you separate Trumas and Meisers? If he says he did, you could trust him. So that's the Akula, because we don't want you to lose out all 100 apples. Ask the guy. Normally we don't trust him, but in this case we'll trust him. Maybe that's the teaching of Shimon Shazuri. The problem is, the problem is Rav Yochanan said we pass on Shimon Shazuri. And if Rav Chanina also said it, he should make the list. So another attempt. Elaha, Rav Yosi ben Kippur Oimim Shimon Shazuri. Pul hamitzi shazar lezera. You have these Egyptian beans that you planted for seeds. The halacha is that when you plant something for seeds, they're edible, but let's assume you plant it for seeding. The halacha is that it's considered trumas, it's chayiv and trumas and meiseris, edible seeds. It's chayiv and trumas and meiseris based on when it took root. Okay, so generally it takes root in a certain year. You separate trumas and meiseris. The halacha is you can only separate trumas and meiseris from that year for that year's fruit. You can't go next year's for last year's or this year's for next year. It doesn't work. You got to go this year's for. So here's the deal. I planted all these Egyptian beans right before Rosh Hashanah, which is a very foolish thing to do. So some of them took root before Rosh Hashanah last year. Some of them took root after Rosh Hashanah next year. The problem is, how do I separate Trumas and Meises? I can't separate Trumas. Normally you just say, we'll take one for the whole group. The problem is, I don't know if it's this year's or last year's or next year's, because I planted it 10 days before Rosh Hashanah. So it says the Gemara, because you can't separate Trumas and Meises from one year to the next. So Kate said, Yasa, what do? Basically take all the Egyptian beans, seeds, put it on the table. So there's a mixture of this year's and next year's. And what you do is, you take 2 times, separate Trumas and Meisers, and we assume that you took, therefore both years are covered. But you don't just take once, because then maybe you're taking for this year's and for next year's. You put it all on the table, you do it, you take it, and then it's all mixed together, so it works, makel. Again, whatever the halach is, that's what Shimon Shazuri is teaching. The problem is the same problem. The problem is, although we pass like Shimon Shazuri, these are the names of the people listed, not Rav Chanina. So why did he not make the list? That must be he was not referring to that halacha. I will stop here. We're going to keep on searching for the Shimon Shazuri tomorrow.